Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to show you step-by-step instructions on how to use flock to add texture to your cards. Hope you enjoy. So I'm just going to start with a piece of card that I've already cut with the Newtons Nook Slimline Frames and Portal die. And using a bit of this post-it note tape, I'm just going to create my own Haley mask so that I can create a bit of interest on my background. You could always use a stencil if you prefer, but using the post-it note tape is a good idea because you can create your own stencil. So I'm just going to start with some Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide, and then I'm going to lighten up this grass a little bit by adding some Scattered Straw Distress Oxide. Then I'm going to carefully remove that post-it note tape. And then you can see I've got this beautiful hillside. And I'm going to use the opposite piece. And I'll use that to mask my hills. And then I'll just use that old piece of post-it note tape on the bottom just to make sure that I don't get any ink on the grassy area. Next, I'm going to use some Speckled Egg Distress Oxide, and I'll put this right above the grassy area. And then I'll put some Broken China Distress Oxide at the top. And then I'll just blend these two blues together, going back and forth between the colors until I'm happy with the sky. And then I can remove the mask and heat set it with my Ranger heat tool. Now, if you prefer, you can always set this aside to dry, but it's important that it's completely dry before you use a stencil and add the next step. So I'm going to line up my stencil, and I'm going to be using the Petite Clouds from Newtons Nook. And then I'm going to use some of the Deco Foil Transfer Gel Duo through the stencil. And this is quite nice medium. It's easy to spread. It sort of goes on like mayonnaise. And the magnets on my Make Art station hold the stencil in place, so I can easily spread it through the stencil. So I'm using a plastic palette knife to apply the Deco Foil gel. And I find it easiest to use one of the flatter palette knives. And I'm just pushing the transfer gel against the stencil and then wiping the excess off. So the trick with this is you want to be able to see the stencil. If you have too much gel on your surface and you can't see the stencil, then just lightly use your palette knife and scrape it off. You want it to be spread thinly, in other words. I'm just going to move my stencil to the other side of my scene, and then I can add some clouds on the other side. And once I've removed the stencil, I'm just going to use the palette knife just to touch up any areas that might have got squished. And then I can put the excess transfer gel back in the jar and clean the stencil. And while that's drying, I'm going to stamp the 4 sheep from the Ba set. These will be adorable once we put some flock on them. And I'm going to cut them out. Now, before we add some flock, I'm just going to color them in quickly. So 3 of these sheep will be white and 1 of them will be black. So for the black sheep, I'm just using C3, C5, and C7 to add some color. And I just added color to the ears, legs, and face for the sheep. And I'll add a bit more color later on, as you'll see. And I'll just blend those colors together until I'm happy with them. Now for the white sheep, I'm just going to use E00, E33, and E50. And similarly, I'm just going to color the ears, the face, and the legs of the sheep. And I'm just going to blend those 3 colors together until I'm happy with the sheep. And I'll repeat that on the 3 white sheep. Now, once they're all colored, I'm going to use the same transfer gel, but this time I'm going to apply it with a paintbrush. And I'm just going to dab it on the sheep where the sheep's wool would be. And I'm being careful not to go onto the areas that I've colored with the Copic markers. Now the gel won't be as smooth as it was put through the stencil, but it gives you a really nice texture, as you'll see later on. So now I'll just set my sheep aside to dry. And meanwhile, I'll just show you, this is what the flock sheets look like. So I've got 2 colors here, the black velvet and the white latte. And they come in large sheets, which you can cut down. And there's paper on the back of your sheets. So once these are completely dry, I'm just going to use a piece of flock and put my stamped image face down onto the flock, and then a bit of parchment paper on either side. And I'm going to run it through my die cut machine. And you can peel it off to reveal the nice fuzzy flock on the sheep. Now you could also run this through your laminator if you prefer, but I find that it works really well just using my Sizzix Big Shot machine. So I'm going to repeat this on my 4 sheep. And the important thing here is that you put it face down on the flock, which is the opposite of the deco foil, if you've ever used that. Because with the foil, you need to put the foil face up. But on these, it's face down. And once I'm finished doing my 4 beautiful sheep, I'm just going to add some flock to the clouds in the background here. Now, the only real downside to using flock, in my opinion, is that you need to wait at least an hour for the transfer gel to dry. But besides from that, it's a great way to add a little bit of texture. So when I was removing the flock on the background, it kind of took the right-hand side of the paper off. As you can see, the clouds on the right aren't as perfect. So if that happens to you, don't worry, you can just cover it up with one of your images. And I'm also going to add a little bit more color to my black sheep here. I don't want to have those white patches, so I'm just going to use a black Copic pen and color in those areas. And if you prefer, you could always do this before adding the flock, but this works just as well, just touching up any areas that don't get covered in the flock. So now that I'm happy with my fuzzy sheep, they're just perfect, I'm going to create a sentiment for my card. So using the same stamp set, I'm going to use a couple different sentiments and line them up together. And I'm using the VersaFine clear sticky ink. And I've just masked the partial area of my stamp with some post-it note tape, just so that I can stamp this into one line instead of a group of 3 lines. And the finished sentiment says, "Oh sheep, I just heard it's your birthday." And I'll add some white embossing powder, and then I'll heat set this with my heat tool. And once it's completely dry, I'll just trim this into a strip with my guillotine. And now I'll just adhere this onto my card front. And I just used a bit of white card and I made it slightly larger than the background. And then I've got foam squares on all my sheep, so I'll just put them onto my scene and then add my sentiment. Now, because the flock is hard to stick things to, I'm just going to add a little bit of glue onto the foam squares as well, just so that my sentiment stays put on my card, it doesn't fall off. And on the inside of the card, I will add another one of these sheep, as well as another sentiment from the stamp set. And I'm really happy with the way this card turned out, and I can't wait to try another one and to use some flock on some of my other stamps and stencils. So I'm just going to add my little sheep here and my sentiment. And I'm just using the VersaFine Onyx Black for this. It says, "Belated birthday wishes." I hope you found this video inspiring and that you'll give it a go. Be sure to subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!